This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. 2025 is just around the corner, and that means you're going to need a new wall calendar. Decorate your space in the new year with a Ditchlight Productions 10th year anniversary calendar. Each month features full color photography of Northeast railroads, including the Reading and Northern, Norfolk Southern, Buffalo and Pittsburgh, and many more, all masterfully captured by Adam Kaczynski. Also available is the Railroad Photography After Dark 2025 calendar, featuring a collaboration of stunning night photography from railroad photographers across the United States. Place your order today. Head to facebook.com/ditchlightproductions or email Adam at ak259901@gmail.com. You can also find both in this episode's notes. The holidays are coming, and we're doing our biggest operating crew giveaway of the year. Join Paul Cassar and me live on Friday, December 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook and YouTube, as a long list of special guests will be stopping by to help us give away model railroading gifts from Athearn, Mini Prints, Ditchlight Productions, 1810 Designs, Mind Mount Models, Scale Trains, Spring Creek Model Trains, Bachman, Late Night Hobbies, Rapido Trains, Weather My Trains, Tully Models, Train World, Broadway Limited, Prairie Shadows, Ron's Books, Home Shops, Z-Track Magazine, Logic Rail Technologies, Model Train Resource, and more. Don't miss out on your chance to win. Become a member of the operating crew on or before this Saturday, November 30th at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about model railroad industries, and joining the conversation, Kevin Tully. Kevin, good to see you again, my friend.
Hey, Ray. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, love to have you back. We've been chatting about a whole bunch of stuff, and then you came on the operating crew chat, and you were sharing some of the projects you were working on, and they were some pretty big projects, and big in scale and big in a whole bunch of things that you've got going on over there.
Yep. We've I had a request. Anybody that saw the really large elevator that I had built for a display at the shows last year, I had a guy email me and say, "Hey, can you do that in O scale?" And I was a little bit taken aback because it'll be like 6 feet long, and I said, "Sure. I mean, I like a challenge." So I said, that's going to be pretty costly. And he didn't bat an eye. He said, "Let's build it." So I'm scaling up all the pieces. I have to build the concrete block scale house, or the concrete elevator head house. I have to scratch build that. But all the other stuff, I've been scratching my head how to make a 100,000 bushel bin in O scale, and I did it. So.
I imagine it's not just a simple multiplication thing, right? There's got to be a bit more to it, and trying to make this stuff scale up and then scale correctly.
There is up or down. If it involves like a tubing, any kind of tubing for, that's supposed to simulate a pipe or something like that, you usually end up resizing that to whatever the math tells you. If it's a 10-inch pipe, you have to do the math for O scale or N or whatever. And then if it's, if you're going up, down is easy. When I go to N, I have to usually figure out how I'm going to make hand railings print. So not everything will translate into N because some of the stuff is just too spindly. But up is harder because I have to usually divide the model up and print it in multiple pieces, which means you have to go into, you have to have some kind of locking ring so it'll only go together one way and things like that. So, and then just figuring out how to print the damn thing because it's so huge. The tower dryer in O is it's got to be almost 2 feet tall. I haven't really looked at how tall it is yet. I think it's 22 inches tall. It's just crazy. And my build volume, even on my big printers, is only so high. So
yeah, that's pretty incredible. I saw it, and then O scale is Very neat, very tangible scale, very easy on the eyes, just very cool scale. You got to have a lot of room, like you mentioned, to not only make the stuff, but then obviously operate it and display it and model it and whole nine yards. So, very cool that you're able to work in a multitude of scales. This is all through Tully Models, of course, and we've had you on the show before, and we've heard you in the beginning of the podcasts as well. But you and I have chatted quite a bit. We've had some really cool offline conversations and talked a lot about industry, and you're certainly heavy into grain mills, and of course steel mills is a big passion of yours. And we started having this conversation about model railroad industry and just ways to make it better and get from the off the shelf kit that you seem to see everywhere else on everybody else's layout and something to make completely or uniquely yours. And you can take and start from there and then build up from there. And so we're going to talk a bit about that, plus doing some research on that, and then even selecting model railroad industry. So we'll have a bit of a chat about that tonight.
Yep. It's a pretty broad conversation to have. I don't know how much we can cram in, but I think, I definitely want to get across to people that, you can, if your skill level is such that, the Walthers kit building is what you can do, that's great. You can always add some extra details on the outside that are pretty easy to do, and make it really look a lot different than how it comes out of the box. Or you can go so far as to, fully research and measure up a real building and build that from scratch. And, my company, I really try to make it advantageous for people to do either without having to build literally everything. And if you're doing the Walthers building, add some details to the outside in an evening of modeling and make it look completely different.
Yes, a lot will be exciting to talk about. But first, I want to talk about, I guess, the step that right from the beginning is selecting industries and understanding what industries seemingly work well in model railroading and are the rail served ones. I know two seem to be very popular, and and one right off the top is grain mills. It's seemingly grain in the United States and even in North America. Let's not forget our friends in Canada. Grain is a huge commodity. There's a lot of process that goes into it. It's not just the local grain mill down the road. There's a multitudes of steps that go into moving grain across this country.
Yeah, it's definitely, I like to call it the every layout industry, just because anybody that has ever, even today when you're on the highway, but anybody that's ever gone, 3 towns over in whatever state you live in, I would be shocked if you didn't, going through one of those towns on the country roads, you didn't see a feed mill or a grain elevator or something to do with the farming industry along the tracks or in your journey between those 3 towns. And you can kind of pick almost any 3 towns in the United States to go between, and you're going to find something. So it fits really kind of everybody's layout. And because it's so diverse in the scale, from just a transload facility, from emptying one chute on the bottom of a PS2 hopper into a truck, all the way up to export terminals. You have everything in between, so it really is a good industry that fits kind of any layout size and any kind of switching that you want to do.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I'm from New England, for those that don't know, and out here in New England, we're more of a receiver of grain products, and we receive those grain cars. But going out towards your neck of the woods, out towards Illinois and the Midwest, you quickly learn that they're not imported. They're sending the stuff out. It's getting loaded out there, and 2 different ways of looking at it. And then the other part too is there's more than meets the eye of what's happening at these places. And in my mind, it was okay. They just get grain, put it in a car, send it, and they take it. But there's a lot of mixing, blending, drying. There's just a whole load of processes that are happening at these grain mills.
And the great, that's part of the great thing about it too, because in some industries, when you pass the industry on the highway, it's basically just a big sheet metal pole barn, and you have no idea what's going on inside of it. And they could have rail car service for box cars, but you have no idea what's going on inside the building. And visually, it's kind of boring. But for anything to do with the grain industry, it's bucket elevators and grain legs and mixing towers and bins and wet bins and dryers and on and on and on. And it really does almost look like the elevators were having a contest on who could be different from each other because they're all very unique. But I think that from a prototype modeler standpoint, you can go get pictures of the one you want to build. And on the other end of that spectrum, where you've just got a space on the layout and you'd like to put an industry there, because in prototype, they are all different from one another. I mean, you really kind of can't go and see 3 owned by the same company, one town apart, and they're not all completely different from one another. And all doing the same thing. It just happens to be the money they had, the footprint they had, the equipment they could get their hands on, whatever. So from more of a freelance industry, and it's very easy to build something that's visually appealing because of all those bucket elevators and grain legs and whatnot. And people like looking at that stuff. Anybody that's been to somebody's layout or seen in a catalog where it's a square building that's 3 stories tall and there's 2 bins sitting next to it, well, that's pretty boring. But you take that same industry and add a couple of bucket elevators and some grain legs and maybe a dryer and some grain trucks or gravity wagons outside. Now it's a completely different looking industry, and it's something that's interesting to look at. I'm the kind of person that when I go to an operating session and it's mostly plywood, and guys are into that, I get it. That's actually kind of boring to me because I like seeing what does this industry really look like? And that, for me, it shares the realism. So I think adding all these details to especially a grain industry, for the guys that really do enjoy the layouts where the realism is there and they can kind of shrink their mind down to HO scale or whatever scale you're running in. And I think it just makes everything more enjoyable to me.
Well, I think there's 2 aspects to it. One is obviously the visual and being able to see it on the layout and having a more realistic look. But what comes to my mind is it's an opportunity for someone who really wants to learn more to really dive in and learn more. And you were rattling off some nomenclature that I'm not even really familiar with when it comes to grain mills. I've seen them. I know what a bin is, and I know kind of an idea, but it's a great opportunity to really learn how things work. And
it is,
and that entire process. Talk a little bit about how you've learned some of this stuff as you've come along and, up to the point where you're 3D printing this stuff.
Well, when I was a kid in my hometown, my mom ran the feed mill, and I didn't know a ton about it then, but I knew what a dryer was. It always upsets you when you're 10 years old and the dryers come on at 7:00 in the morning and they're right across the street on a summer day and you're trying to sleep in, But I knew some of that stuff, and then just kind of growing up around that stuff, I worked at an agway when I was 14. And I started learning a little bit about that. But to be honest with you, I just did a lot of reading and research, and it doesn't take a lot. I talked to, believe it or not, Lonnie Bathurst from the St. Louis RPM. He worked for Zimmerman back in the day, and they're the ones that pioneered the tower dryers that are prevalent today at all the big elevators. And another guy informed me that one of the elevators I built was wrong because they never mix wet and dry grain in the bucket elevators. And it's just those little tiny things. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of really, really technical information to know about a lot of those. But for modeling, I'm the kind of guy that when I get into an industry, I want to learn soup to nuts. I want to learn, is it coming out of the ground? How's it making it to where it's going? And what are they doing to it before it gets on, in the store or in a yard where it's being sold? And I just find that incredibly interesting aspect of model railroading is learning these other industries. I like to learn where things come from. And so the great thing about the grain industry is if getting from the field to your bakery the flour being made, the grain, the whole grain end of it. And I'm sure there's a listener out there that works in the industry and go, well, that's a really simple way to put it. But, we're talking about modelers and making sure that if a guy that works as at a grain elevator does come over to your layout, he goes, oh, that looks like very realistic. I mean, that's a big compliment when you have someone that does it in real life. They see your model and go, wow, that's totally realistic how you did that. And the basic thing is the grain comes out of the field. It's considered wet. It's going to come in a truck. You're going to run it through a truck dump of some type at the elevator. There's going to be a bucket elevator, whether it's inside the elevator or it's an external one that you can see. That bucket elevator is going to be a wet leg, and it will never see dry grain. And they have it's going to go into one of two devices. They're going to take it up the bucket elevator, and it's going to go straight into the dryer if it's the morning and the dryer is empty. And as the dryer fills up and starts its cycle, everybody has seen while there's surge bins. Well, the surge part is because they're getting such a surge of fresh grain coming in from the field, because once the farmers start harvesting, they're running grain trucks till there's no more grain to harvest.
Right.
And that same bucket elevator is then going to be diverted over to the surge bins and fill the surge bins up, the wet bins. And that grain's going to stay there until the dryer has cycled, and then they can run usually through some kind of an auger out of the bottom of the wet bin over to the bucket elevator and go up into the dryer. And once it comes out of the dryer, it's going to go to a dry leg. And it's, I'm talking very broad strokes here, but it's going to go up over to a dry leg. And from the dry leg, it's going to go to the storage bins. And it may go to the storage bins because they don't have rail cars there to fill. And those will come in later, and it'll come out of the bottom of the storage bins and go back through a dry leg somewhere and go to a loader, or something as simple as I've seen just a grain leg coming down from the diverter at the top of the bucket elevator that's just got a big rubber or canvas hose on the end of it where they're going to fill grain cars right from that. Some of the smaller elevators, I've seen that a lot. And you see that in pictures all the time. I'm sure that takes forever to do, but so as long as you've got your idea of what your elevator is doing, you can then tailor what you're going to purchase to model. And, like I said, if you're doing freelance, you got to ask yourself, is the grain coming into my elevator in a rail car or is it coming in from a truck? And if it's coming in from a truck, a lot of farms today are drying their own grain. In Avon, New York, I was on one of the back roads there last time I was out to see my sister, and went down this road out of town along the L&L tracks. And here's this giant outfit. I thought it was a company outfit, but it belongs to this farmer. And they got, if I remember right, they got two tower dryers. I mean, they must do crazy business at that place for the farm itself to own all that, but they're drying their own grain there and they're shipping it out dry from there. Wow. So, I mean, in modern times, that's very common. In the old days, I don't know how common it was. There's a farm near here out in Leland, Illinois, that's got a Clayton and Lambert Rotoflow dryer right on the farm. And I actually talked to the old guy that his daughter and son-in-law had owned it now, but he worked there as a kid, and his dad is the one who put that dryer in the 50s. So, it's not uncommon in the transition era for that stuff to exist on a farm. But the primary thing is your grain's coming in from the field. It's got to get dried. You're going to have some kind of hopper to fill when there's an overflow, because there's a lot coming in fresh. And then from there, it's going to go out of the dryer into a dry leg, and that's what's going to go up, to the storage bins. And in the old days, those, the wet leg may be outside, but the dry legs were often inside that big concrete structure. So you wouldn't see them. That's why there's that cupola looking narrow top on most of the, even in the wooden grain elevator kits, that narrow wooden top is the top of the bucket elevators that are inside the elevator itself. So as long as you keep that basic thing going, keep the wet on the wet and the dry on the dry, you're, no matter freelanced or not, it's going to look very prototypical.
Yeah, I just see it as an awesome opportunity to learn more stuff and get beyond the, the overview that I see when you go buy these and just go, oh, bins, this, that, and you dive deep into that. And then it also affects what you're modeling and then your operation setup to it as well, because the more you learn about it, and I'll skip a little bit over more towards like feed mills for animal feed. I never got this in my head for some reason, and then finally I figured out it's not just coming in one, covered hopper that's, animal feed. It's coming in as a product and they're mixing this stuff. They're making different blends of feeds.
Yeah, right.
And so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there, which opens up a whole new opportunity to bring more cars or different cars. Or if you're really into routing, the Matt Fricks kinds of people who really love their routing stuff.
Yeah, right.
Now you can really dive in, because now you've got all these different ingredients that are coming in different cars. And now you've changed and expanded operations at this one industry.
Yeah, I think on a smaller layout, you see guys that have a smaller layout, especially the shelf layouts are very popular today. And I can understand why. It's a very attainable thing to finish. It doesn't take up a ton of room. And you can have hours and hours and hours of fun switching on a shelf layout versus a roundy round where you're just running trains in a circle. And I think if I had a layout like that in my spare room in my house or whatever, and I had to choose between a grain elevator and a feed mill, it would be a feed mill all day long. Because the grain elevator, even if it's an export elevator where the grain is coming in rail served and going out rail served, you have some covered hoppers and they come in and they go out. That's kind of it. I mean, you could have a flat car with some equipment on it because they needed to change out some equipment in the mill or something like that. But, that's kind of it. But at a feed mill, you're right. You've got different hoppers coming in from different places, especially if you like cow routing. You've got all these different, wheat and alfalfa and rye and whatever else, oats. And then, we're at least working in the feed mill I worked in as a teenager, we had tank cars of molasses come in because they use molasses for the binder. Yep. And then you're going to have box cars or trucks that would come in with bags, empty bags, paper bags, because they're going to bag the feed to ship it back out. And that could go on pallets and go in a box car, or maybe the paper bags come in a box car and all the bag feed goes out on trucks, but you've got several different kinds of cars that are coming in. To me, it's a lot more traffic. Some of the smaller ones, like the Agway that I worked at in Hornell, we only had one track. So you get molasses delivery, it's on that track. You get a box car that's got salt licks and empty bags and things like that in it. Well, that's the same track. And when you're getting the grain in, whether the farmers are bringing it in a truck or if you're having a shipment of something that's only grown in the West or whatever, that it's only on that track. So now you've got switching problems as well, because you've got, the yard decided to send a covered hopper of grain and a box car with salt licks and bags in it on the same day. And, which one has to go in and get spotted first? Does the locomotive have to come back and change the cars out later? Is there a rail car winch? I just think on a smaller layout, even on a large layout, but certainly on a smaller layout, I'd have a feed mill all day long. And typically, I give a clinic, and in the clinic, I talk about how a lot of the feed mills, pretty much they all were rail served, especially, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they were, a lot of those buildings are slivers. They're very, not very wide, and they tend to be very long. And, that will fit on a shelf layout or in that area where you've only got one track, but you'd really like to have a cool looking industry in there. So, I mean, feed mills to me are the choice all day long. Now, if you've got a big layout, and you want to run a big elevator, that's fine. A big grain elevator looks fantastic when you get it all finished. But
well, I had such enjoyment with you. I took a couple aerial photos of the local mill down in Franklin, Connecticut, and I had such a good time with you because we were looking through, like, figuring out what they were doing, and then even looking back, kind of like ghost railroading in sense, or ghost grain milling or feed milling, right? Where we
Right.
were
Yeah. Right.
looking
I
at
haven't figured out that word yet, but there
yeah,
is
I don't know.
there is a group of people. I mean, I like to say there are nerds for everything, and there are
yeah,
grain elevator nerds
yeah,
and female nerds.
right. And then we were kind of ghosting, like, okay, what did they used to do here? Because there's this
Right.
warehouse, you can kind of see where the siding used to be. So it just starts to drum up all these neat ideas when you start applying it to model railroad operations, that you could have all this stuff going, that they could be bringing in feed from the West. They're mixing it there, then they're bagging it, and then the box cars maybe being loaded with bagged feed to be shipped out somewhere. Or like you said, they were maybe more of a universal supplier where they were getting salt licks and bags, or they were getting something else that was being served there. And just all in my mind of thinking, boy, this just means higher car counts. It also means more to be done in one spot.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's kind of a point we've driven through. We've talked about it with Don Iris on the Talking Ops with Don Iris shows. You don't need 15 different industries on your layout when you can get something like a feed mill that's just so diverse. There's just so much going on. Like you said, tank cars, molasses, and the covered hoppers with different product, and box cars. And it just gives you so much neat variety.
Yeah. I mean, our agway that I worked at, I think we got the box cars with salt licks, pallets of salt licks, and there were other nutrients and stuff that they would give the livestock. We got all that stuff in at ours, I think, because we had a siding, and it's not, the building is still there. If somebody wanted to go on Google Earth and look at Hornell, New York, it's on the north end of town, and just before the river, and it's not that big of a building, but trucks came from Canisteo and a couple of the other agways and picked stuff up to take to their agway because they weren't rail served. So even though it's not a very large industry, you could have that kind of rail traffic coming in with the operating premise that the stuff was being delivered there and an empty box car was leaving, or maybe the box car is being shipped back out with bagged feed in it. And the stuff that's being come in there, it's essentially a transload freight house. And those products are going out in a truck to service the smaller feed mills that are satellites of that one in the area.
Yeah, a lot of awesome opportunity. You can, let your imagination run wild. Well, let's talk about putting it all together now. I mean, we talked about, the different levels, I guess, right? Your entry level into more advanced modeling. And we talked about some off the shelf kits that you could start with and maybe develop from there. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then kind of making it your own.
I think, one of the great things, I mean, you've heard me say before my catchphrase, the march of time. I think at one of these industries, it's really awesome. You kind of have to think about, when was it built and what era am I modeling? Right. Because those two things on some guys' layouts, I don't think I get the feeling that that's not a consideration, and it should be. Just because your layout is set in 1958 doesn't mean that the buildings on the layout or the industries couldn't have already been there for 40 years. You're just modeling a point in time. And the March of Time stuff is great because you can have clapboard sided elevators or feed mills with corrugated sheet pole barns next to them that they added on, like the Ricks kits or the Pike Stuff kits. And it's totally appropriate because the mill I worked at was clapboard siding. And I recently built a feed mill that's in a town called Holcomb, Illinois. I'm building it for Mark Nolan for his Illinois Central layout. And as I was looking at photographs of it, I'm like, damn, that building looks almost identical to a Walters kit. Well, sure enough, it looks close enough to the Sunrise feed mill that they sell that it's pretty spot on. And, I basically, anybody could start with that kit. It's a very easy kit to put together, a little bit of weathering on it, paint it so it looks nice, but a little bit of weathering on it. And you've got a great starter for your feed mill. and it's an inexpensive kit. I think it's $30 or $35.
Sure.
And I added in a Rick's building to represent the freight house that they had added at some point in time. And then everything else was just bins and bucket elevators to make it into a feed mill, and some signage, and it's not something that a person of almost any skill level couldn't make. Making the grain legs and, dividing them up. Obviously I didn't put as many as are at the real one. Because it was getting too busy looking, but it certainly is very impressive looking. And, that Walters kit, anybody can build. If even painting it and making it look nice as you go, I rearranged a little bit of the kit, but I don't think you'd have more than a couple of modeling evenings in it to make it look nice. So it's not a big time suck either, like scratch building something or building a American Model Builders kit. So I think that's a good entry level, and they have several buildings that could be a feed mill building. That's the thing, going around the country, looking at the different buildings. I think the biggest thing I would tell guys at home to not do is stop looking at the title on the box and what it says it's supposed to be, and start looking at the building and think about what it could be. What does it look close enough to? Because you go out east and a lot of those buildings were brick, especially down in, I've seen buildings down in like Maryland and stuff where the original feed mill building itself was brick. And it was because of what the materials that were available at the time, and the cheap labor.
Right.
And that stuff's still standing and still being used. So it's not wrong, but you can really kind of mix it up, and that might make someone come over to your layout and go, wait a minute, isn't that supposed to be this? But you've got it as a feed mill. That looks really good. It's outside the box, so to speak.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well, you even pointed that out. And I love that, hearing about the materials, and when you have that conversation of, thinking about the era and what they had available or what was inexpensive, and, just know that's all still that really neat learning. You're learning history along with it,
totally.
Which is just it's a bonus. It's a complete bonus to this whole model railroading thing, to learn exactly not only what things are, but why they were the way they were.
I think in conversations about structures, model railroaders are incredibly knowledgeable about freight cars and locomotives, and when they were built and who used them and what route they were on or what branch line they were on or where they went after that railroad was defunct or whatever. And so they've got the skill level already there to learn some of the other things that can make their layout a lot more realistic. And some of that stuff is that, not to switch gears, but talking about the steel mill stuff, if you look at the blowing engine house that's still standing in Bethlehem, it's brick. They had rolling mills out there that were a mile long that were brick. Why? Well, because they were built in the early 1900s. There was a lot of Polish and Irish bricklayers that were all looking for work because they were immigrating here. And brick on the East Coast, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of clay, and there's brick everywhere. And so, cheap materials and cheap labor. So they built these giant buildings out of brick. But, as the stuff out here that was built during World War II for the war effort, corrugated sheet had become less expensive to build. What is now known as the I-beam, that was then known as the Bethlehem beam, because they're the ones that figured out how to make a beam lightweight and yet support lots of weight. Mm-hmm. Those both became prevalent, and they're already making that stuff there anyway. So they were building the mills out of it. So out here, a blowing engine house might be corrugated sheet. And it really kind of tells you, this mill has all these brick buildings. It's got to have been here since the early 1900s. And that for me, that translated over into all these other industries. It's very, very common to see furniture factories. And there was a casket works near where I grew up. They were brick, and it's because of the area of the country. And thinking about that, if you're modeling the Rio Grande, is a lot of your stuff made out of Adobe, because Adobe brick was cheap. Yeah. Out here in the Midwest, They seem to build a lot of things out of the wood early on, and out west too. There's not a lot of building materials in North Dakota, so a lot of the elevators are all built out of wood. They could bring it on a flat car and erect it, and a lot of that stuff got used even to this day. There's wooden elevators that are still being used as not the main elevator anymore, but they're still using the structure somehow. So, I mean, it's fun. It's fun for me to learn about those things because I think in your industry modeling, it makes it more realistic, especially if you're focused on the area. I'm even nerdy enough that I know the colors of brick in the different parts of the country, and it's because of the clay, right? I mean, if you're out west in California, the brick buildings are yellow. The guys in California are going to shoot me because I'm sure it's not yellow, but it sure looks yellow in photographs.
Yeah.
It's probably yellowish tan or some color like that. But
Sure.
But, out east, the bricks are a little darker red. Here in Chicago, they're more orangey, and I have lots of stuff at our train club that I've done where I pay attention to that stuff that no one else knows about but me. But hopefully the people come visit, they're like, oh, wow, that looks like it's in Chicago.
Well, again, more of that inside, that history, that understanding that, and I kind of balance it off these conversations we had even back with Lance Minheim about learning to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning to, instead of just say, okay, feed mill, or here's a steel mill. Like, what kind of steel mill is it? What is it being built out of? Lord, that's all that realistic stuff that you can then take with you. And when you start digging a little bit deeper, you bring that realism that you were talking about in the beginning of the show back to your layout and understanding it. And even this picture, and I'm going to share that picture on our website, aroundthelayout.com/133. This picture that you and I shared of the Hillendale Farms Mill with a former Cough mill and in Franklin, Connecticut. And you were pointing out stuff that I didn't even notice. Like, look what it's made out of. It was just clapboard siding style building. And I'm like, boy, I could scratch build that.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
And, it's like, it's just a rectangular tall building. It doesn't take a whole lot to scratch it. And then I was like, oh man, I gotta clear a bench spot off somewhere because I really want to scratch build because I want to. And again, no offense to the fine folks at Walthers, but I have the Walthers grain mill and it looks just like that Joe's and that's Bill's and this guy and everybody else that's got one. How about something that's completely and uniquely, one, mine, and two, really represents what you would see? Because I don't know if you would see a whole lot of those concrete ones around here, but boy, you could see, just like we saw, here's something that I could model that would look exactly like what we've got right down the street.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that I have conversations at the shows with a lot of guys because we offer a lot of scratch building parts, in the form of brackets and pipe fittings and things like that. But it's interesting when you are talking to someone, you can just scratch build that. No, I could never do that. Why? Have you built a Walthers kit or another company's kit? Oh yeah, I build model kits all the time. Okay, so you're already scratch building. The only thing you're not doing is you're not cutting the parts out and you're not making your own instructions. But you are. I mean, if you really think about, if you change your mindset that you can do it, because if you can use a hobby knife and you can use a ruler and you can use a set of calipers is handy for measuring window sizes. But if you can use those tools and a pencil, you can scratch build a feed mill or a wooden grain elevator. And I think one of the things that I find that people, the plastic's hard to cut. Well, it's true, but Northeast Scale Lumber offers an amazingly huge array of things, and you can buy clapboard siding in a sheet. It's basswood. It's not overly hard to cut with a good sharp hobby knife. And if you lay all your window openings and your door openings and things, I mean, let's face it, a feed mill is not going to have 300 windows in it. You're going to put 10 in the whole building.
Yeah.
And a couple of doors and a freight door. And Tichy Train Group sells all that stuff. I think Grant Line got bought up and they sell that kind of stuff. And there's a myriad of other people that sell windows and doors and things like that. layout, when I was a professional fabricator, layout was really hard to get people to wrap their noodle around how important the layout is. And I think it's because of the fun, right? We're doing something that we enjoy, and you just want to get to the building because that's the dopamine hit, right? Look at this building I constructed.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you take a piece of paper and draw out to scale what you're going to do, and then you take that and transfer it to your wood, if you're building a wooden elevator,
Right.
and then you take your time and drill out the corners, maybe with a tiny drill, and use a good sharp hobby knife, and stop being afraid to throw away the blades when they're dull, and just take your time and cut it all out. Pretty soon you've got all your walls made, and you can start putting that building together, and it looks very professional. My good friend Stephen Milley over at Railscale Models makes a lot of great roofing shingles, and I mean he has a lot of model kits as well, but he has a lot of parts that you can get that will make your model look 100 times more realistic. And it's really easy to use that kind of stuff, the shingles. I mean, people are very afraid of using paper shingles. I highly recommend getting the ones with a little adhesive back on them, and you just take your time. You're not roofing your house, and it doesn't need to survive a tornado. You're roofing a model, and if you screw it up, rip them off and do it again. That's the way you learn. But
Right.
it's a very easy structure to do, and it's something that if you just take your time, and like I said, when you draw it out on paper, you're making your instruction sheet and your references, and then transferring all those dimensions over onto your wood, and then being very careful cutting it all out. It'll take you a little while, but that's modeling, right? It's not supposed to be something that happens in a hurry.
Well, and that goes back to the point you made when we had this conversation back when you were on the What's Happening episode with Tony Cook. What you're doing, even with Tully Models, isn't to replace that. It's to supplement and encourage the scratch building, and then provide the pieces so that you can get back to that true modeling, right? That
Yeah.
where you're really are creating things with your hands, which is one of the pleasures of this hobby, is
Yeah.
being able to do that, is to be able to step back and really take that dopamine hit and say, I built that. It's
Right.
not
Yeah,
something,
exactly.
I built. This is something that's, again, that I keep using that term, uniquely mine, that nobody else has this, because I built this from the raw materials, just like the prototype did.
Yep. And I can't stress enough the research. We're all model railroaders, and we all know how to do research. If you can research where a locomotive was built, when it was delivered to the railroad, and where it went after it left that railroad, you can certainly research an industry. And some of these places still exist, and if they're close to you, if not, the Google Earth has a measuring device on it. You get really close, and if you're a foot and a half off, I don't think anybody's going to really care, because nobody's getting on your layout with a measuring stick and telling you your building's a foot and a half long. The research and the layout, the planning and the layout are paramount. And to be honest with you, if you're doing all that, you make your bill of materials up, meaning your windows and doors and your lights and whatever else you got to have from Evergreen or wherever, and you order all that stuff. You got it all sitting on your bench. You have everything laid out. I mean, it's the same as a model kit, but you have to do a little bit extra work.
Yeah.
And once you have all of those things, you can build that, whatever it is. And you're right. I mean, guys are talking on the Steel Mill Modeling page on Facebook. Every few months, there's a guy on there, I'm really looking for a Walther's blowing engine house. And but they're crazy money on eBay and blah, blah, blah. And I usually answer up, why don't you just build it? That blowing engine house was a copy of one that Dean Freitag built from scratch. It's not rocket science. It's some stairs and some doors and windows. And the rest of it is corrugated sheet from Evergreen Styrene or Plastroct or JTT Plastics. Pick one. It's sheet styrene. It's a big rectangle with a roof on it. It's not rocket science. And to be honest, if you're going to go pay $175 for that Walther's kit that was $50, or however much they were when they came out, You can go spend $30 or $40 on the parts and build it yourself in a configuration that you want that will fit the space in your layout. Your hands aren't tied, to whatever their footprint is. And it's not a hard building to build.
Yeah, you can mess it up twice and still be dollars ahead.
Right. Yeah, exactly. and it's the skill, right? Every time you scratch build something, when you get done, you should critique yourself and say, what could I have done better? And how am I going to do it better next time? And then it's just important to try and remember that when the next time it comes along, when you're building that next thing.
Yeah. And as your skills improve, you can go back, you can build something and it comes out pretty good. And then maybe you come back to it. I mean,
totally.
None of this is, and maybe this is just me, but I gotta hope that somebody is, hopefully is equally odd as I am. Sometimes you build stuff and you think that it's worth the $1 million at the real prototype. It's not. It's just plastic. Throw it away. Build something else. I think sometimes we get locked in on having, the or at least me at times, where I get that, I hit that hesitation to do that, of rip it out, tear it up, knock this down, pull it out, and just that's how you build the skill set. It just doesn't happen overnight, and I said it on a previous podcast. It's, it's hard until it's not, right? You continue to do things and then it becomes easier.
What's the phrase that you use? Burn it down, or
the Joe Mammy theory. Yeah. Design it, build it, burn it. Yeah. That's the Joe Mammy approach to model railroading. But he does it, and he's not afraid to. If he doesn't like something, rip it out. He's a great case for, if you're not happy, you got to do something about it.
Guys bulldoze their whole layouts every few years. And I mean, Mark Nolan had a beautiful steel mill layout. No longer. It's all gone. And he's building this beautiful IC layout. And I don't know if it's because I haven't asked him. I don't know if it's because he got bored with it, or if he just wanted to do something different, or he had his fun and he was ready to move on. But it doesn't matter. I mean, if you can knock down a whole layout and build a new one, you can certainly take a structure that you built and go, you know what, I can do better next time. And I really learned a lot on this, and turn it into a positive, really feel good about it. This doesn't look like I wanted it to, but I learned a lot. And now I know what to do the next time. And there's a huge internet community of people out there that are more than willing to give advice. Sometimes a little, if you get on the Facebook, it's a little too much because it turns into a no, do it this way, with 100 posts. But I have found, in using, speaking of Facebook and using Facebook as a resource, if there's something I'm trying to learn, I'm more prone to looking at someone else's work and then going through the comments section or messaging the person that made the original post because I liked their work, and say, hey, would you mind taking a minute and explaining to me what product you use, or did you learn that from a video, or, is it something you can just, I mean, Tom Johnson, he's such a nice guy, and he's such a unbelievably phenomenal modeler. And I was floored. I messaged him and I'm like, you got to write a book or something, man, or have a YouTube channel, something. But, could you tell me how to do X? And he had no problem. He sent me this huge, long private message on Facebook detailing about how to do this operation that I had seen him do with making the panel lines, the corrugated sheet panel lines on his elevator that he did. And he was more than happy to tell me. And people are like that, but I think it's better. I think it's better to find the person whose work you like and send them a message than ask, the general populace of Facebook because you're going to get 100 different answers and not one of them. And that's part of model railroading, right? How do I weather flat card decks? Well,
there's
I don't want to get off on a tangent, but there's 100 different methods and they all look fantastic. So you just pick one and try it. And if it works for you, great. If not, you move on to the next one. And scratch building is very much the same way. There are basic skill sets that will let you build anything you want to. It is a little more structured because scratch building really, for me, scratch building comes from professional fabricating. So I have that mindset. And there are more than one path to the top of the mountain, so to speak. in even professional fabricating, but there are a lot of basic skill sets that everyone starts from. And once you get those, it allows you to really kind of imagineer almost anything.
I think sticking your neck out, not only, in general, can yield you some great results, and that all that information, not only talking to great modelers, but even with prototype industries. I mean, you suggested, and I asked some questions to you, and you're like, go down there and ask them. And I got to, go down and go down to the grain mill during the day and just, the feed mill locally, and just say, hey, listen, I'm a model railroader. I want to build something like this. Would you mind just, tell me a bit about it? And amazing. The vast majority of people are good, and vast majority of people want to talk and share information and help others. And just don't be afraid to ask. The worst they can say is no and go away. I mean, you're already gone away if you don't ever go ask. So just go ask. The worst thing they can say is get out of here. But most likely they're going to say, sure, let me tell you about all that. They may or may not allow you access because of safety concerns, but they may at least tell you how things work and get you that great information that will help you, and then take it back and apply it to your layout.
Along that line, I have a very short, funny story to tell you. I had a customer contact me and he said, hey, you need to make this product. Said, okay. He sent me some photos of it. Sent me some photos of a toy version. In another, it's not really even a train part, but it is a real product. And I was like, oh, yeah. So I started asking everybody I knew, hey, do you know where one of these is in a junkyard? Is there one of these at an implement dealer? Is there one of these at an old, in a salvage yard somewhere I could go take measurements off of? I'm racking my brain trying to find one of these things, looking all over the internet for photographs, any kind of prints, whatever. And then I was like, wait a minute. I can see the name of this on the side of it. I can see the original maker's decal on there. So I did a quick Google search, found the company, sent the guy an email, ended up talking to the president of the company and told him what I wanted to do. And he's like, I think we got prints for that still. It's from the 60s, but I'm pretty sure we can dig it up. 2 days later, I got a digitized copy of the print that he would have sent over to the fabrication shop to build the thing.
Wow.
And he told me, and he sent me the logo. I asked him, hey, you don't, I'm sure that is the logo you have now, is it different from back then? He goes, oh yeah, we changed it a little bit. We modernized it, but I think we have something with that on it too. A couple days later, digitized copy. Wow. He said, you can use anything you want as long as you put our name on the end of the box. I'm like, sure. I said, you know what? I'm going to print you one out in O scale and I'm going to send it to you for your desk.
Awesome.
So, I mean, sometimes it is that easy. It's just asking, like you said, roll up to the feed mill. I mean, steel mills aren't going to let you do that anymore, but roll up to the industry if it's a small town industry and say, hey, would you mind if I poke around a little bit? Maybe go on a weekend day when they're not as busy, unless that is their busy time. Or just go into the office and say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. I'd like to know, is there a day when I could come when it's not real busy and I could just measure the outside of the building, or can I take some photographs? Would that bother you? And like you said, these people are, especially in the ag industry, they're super friendly. They're probably going to be floored that you want to build whatever the industry is they're working at. And another really good source that I think people don't think about is the local historical society.
Oh, yeah.
You think about that for trains. I'm going to contact the Norfolk and Western Historical Society. Well, guess what? You go to the county or the town historical society, and they could have pictures of that, what it looked like the day it opened. I mean, people used to do that. They'd hire a photographer. They'd get all the employees standing out front. They'd get their brand new trucks sparked out there and take a picture in 1952, and they built a place. Yeah. And you get to see what it used to look like,
Yeah, well, it was big news for those towns too. I mean, it was a big happening, So it would, and part of the rich history of a town to be able to talk about the industries that helped build it. So great resource.
Totally. And they're usually happy I've had those places ask me to send them photographs when I get the model done, because the thing doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And at least they have that. They can show someone, look, we don't have any pictures of this industry, but this is what it looked like as far as we know.
Well, wow, we've covered a lot in the last 50 minutes or so, as we were talking about taking industries from the off-the-shelf style to something more realistic, and then how we get all this information and how we apply it, and putting aside your fear of scratch building and jumping right into it and start to learn. So a lot of stuff that
Feet
we've
first.
covered. Yeah, that's right. Dive right into it. Yeah. Yep. And get yourself some sharp razor blades and get to work. So covered a lot of awesome stuff here. I want to get to our question of the month because we tied that into kind of what we were talking about tonight. And the question of the month was, what is the cornerstone industry of your layout? Or what will that industry be when you build your layout? And we've got some really great submissions here, so we're going to take a listen to them.
Hey all, my name is Dennis Colucci and I'm from Wappingers Falls, New York. And I've got two answers to this question. On my current layout, the Balfour Industrial, the cornerstone industry is the Hudson Cement Company. Every operating session, it receives 2 covered hoppers that are empty to get loaded with cement powder. 2 covered hoppers that are on the off spot get switched to the loading-unloading track under the shed. And 2 loaded cars get picked up and brought back with the local after it turns. And when I build my next layout, which is going to be based on the hospital branch in Poughkeepsie, New York, off the New Haven line, my cornerstone industry is not going to be an industry as much as a customer. And that is going to be the state hospital in Poughkeepsie, which the branch is named after. Every operating session, regardless of else is going to go on, it's going to receive a number of coal hoppers to the power plant on the hospital property to give power to the rest of the hospital for that day. So thanks for the podcast. Thanks for sharing, and hope you're having a good one.
Dennis, great submission with 2 parts here. So let's talk about the first part, which is cement industry, which is yet another one that's not just as simple as that. There's a multitude of different things, that makes concrete and the aggregate product.
Yeah. Totally. And a really good resource that guys modeling the cement industry might not realize is U.S. Steel used to put out a book called The Making, Shaping, and Treating of Steel. And Portland Cement exists because of the steel industry. That was one of their industries that they pretty much invented to deal with, the cast off slag from the steel making process, the iron making process. In their book, they have a great chapter with a pull-out diagram of all the different parts of a cement plant and, what kind of loads come in. There's a chapter written on it, and it's a really good resource. And it's not in all. They come out about every 6 or 7 years throughout the history. The oldest one I've seen was from the 20s. But the ones from the 50s have generally have the cement plants in them. There was 3 copies in the 50s, and they generally have the cement plant in there. So it's a really good resource. But, you've got limestone, you've got aggregate coming in. I'm trying to think what else. You got slag coming in that could come from, that'll be Matt Fricks's favorite load is the slag load.
Yeah, stone products.
Yeah, the aggregate stone coming in, and then you got rail cars with bags if they're bagging the cement, because cement plants do that. They don't only put it in a truck or a rail car to ship out; they also bag it, and that could be shipped in a box car.
Sure.
So you'd have the pallets and the bags coming in box cars and going out loaded. So that's a good industry with a lot of different cars coming in.
Absolutely. And then the second part he talked about, you wouldn't even, if you looked at a hospital and what the heck would a hospital receive by rail? Are they going to move patients by rail to a hospital? Yeah. Probably not. But they still it's yet another building that requires, it needs fuel to run the heating aspect of the building. And, some of these early buildings were coal fired and definitely a neat,
and they made their own electricity.
Power plant right on site.
Back then, you didn't have 2 Cat diesels out back making the power if the main lines were cut. A lot of those hospitals, people don't realize that back in the day, big cereal plants, probably I would think maybe big paper mills. I'm not overly familiar with the paper industry, but I would think maybe big paper mills and certainly hospitals. They had their own power plants. They made their own electricity. They made their own steam heat. And, it's not just the coal cars coming into those places. They're going to have lubricants for the turbines. They're going to have new parts for those turbines or for the water treatment Anybody running boilers got water treatment. So you got lime coming in maybe for the water treatment, or you're using, I don't know much about the water treatment industry, but I'm sure there's maybe sand. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's always shipments of equipment and parts and lubricants coming into those places as well. That could be rail served. No problem.
Absolutely. Let's hear from Keith Aleo.
Hi, my name is Keith Aleo, and I am from Traverse City, Michigan. And my cornerstone industry on my layout is the Cemex quarry in Miami, Florida. I model the Florida East Coast, and they connect using Ortner hopper cars and several other kinds. They also have quite a nice SW unit that moves things on the quarry, which is something I'm in the process of modeling.
Yeah, so there you go. Quarry operations, I've got one that's near me. That same thing. They've got a small switcher there, loading stone trains that go out of Plainfield, and they head down towards New Haven, and then beyond that down to Fresh Pond, New York. And there's just a lot of that kind of stuff, and there you can just do operations right in the quarry itself. Doesn't even really have to leave there, just loading cars there. So great little industry. Well, the man that needs no introduction because he didn't give one is Ken Zeska. So we'll take a look at what Ken's in.
On my layout, I have 4 distinct destinations. One is the prairie, where it's a number of grain elevators. One is a power plant. One is a downtown with a good-sized freight house. And the other is a large grain processing plant and a cold storage.
So Ken, knocking out there's more Midwest influence there. A lot of grain mills and a lot of that industry going on his there.
A good variety of traffic coming in and out of there too for both of those places. All 4 of those industries, you've got a lot of good variety of cars going in and out. That's probably a lot of fun to operate on that layout.
Absolutely. Now it's time for a nice, cool beverage with Mr. Paul Cassar.
My name is Paul Cassar, and I'm from Sydney, Australia. For me, on the Riverbelt line, it's definitely the brewery. The brewery has a number of areas that I use to operate. There's a receiving spur, a distribution spur, and also a spur that takes corn syrup and also loads beer tank cars. So there's an assortment of cars that go in and out of the brewery, including box cars, reefers, beer tank cars, corn syrup cars. It also has attached to it a grain silo, a grain terminal, which takes hoppers, of course, and PS2s for the barley. So lots of different cargoes go in and out, glass bottles, crates, even labels for printing, and, of course, different types of corn, beer, and assorted materials in and out of the brewery. So definitely the brewery, and that also attaches to the layout for other grain terminals that feed the brewery as well.
Yeah, so not only, there are a couple things that Paul had hit on there. One is there's more than meets the eye that goes into making barley and hops and getting it into that cool beverage, into that glass that's sitting next to you, right? There's so many products and, that all can be rail served right to the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of places, a lot of guys that have an industry on the layout, for me, it was steel mills, but I had not ever considered, I mean, you think about a steel mill, it's coal and lime, or coke and limestone and iron ore, right? That's a steel mill. Yeah, no, there's a picture from one of the mills that I saw a guy posted one day of the freight house, and it was like it had to be 16 or 18 track yard full of every kind of car you can think of that wasn't a hopper. And it was all stuff coming into the mill, lumber, center beams full of lumber. I didn't know steel mills use that much lumber, but they use lumber for shipping things and making crates. And I mean, it was just amazing. And a brewery, definitely. All the packaging, the bottling. I mean, there's so much that goes into that. Same with like a cannery, canning food or canning dog food or whatever they're canning. I mean, if you really think about that, it's usually more than the load itself, the product. it's a lot more to support that. In an industry like that, I can't imagine how much fun it is to operate his layout with all his different loads coming and going.
Oh yeah, and then he's got both sides of the the supply chain going. Right, he's got it on one end of the layout. There's the grain mill that's feeding and sending the barley and hops over to the brewery. So you can tie that all in and make the entire supply chain move for sure.
And that's another industry that back, and I'm not sure, maybe one of the listeners should comment somehow on the Facebook page or on your website. I'm not sure when this would have ended, but again, that's another industry that probably back in the day had its own power plant, because the grid back then, the grid wasn't going to support an industry that was using power like a brewery would use. And I would have to think a brewery would just have massive power draws with all the equipment, not only for making the beer, but also for all the canning line and everything with the conveyor belts and all that. I mean, it's got to be an immense power draw. And I would assume that they would have some kind of, no matter, it might not be huge, but they might get a hopper a week of coal to fuel the boilers. I don't know. I mean,
I would imagine, especially the ones out in St. Louis, Missouri, or Golden, Colorado, and all in
most certainly.
Where more likely is the massive operations
Milwaukee.
Probably did. Yeah, Milwaukee. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's travel. Well, stay around the other side of the world with Michael Neal coming to us from New Zealand.
Hi, Ray. Michael Neal here from Auckland, New Zealand. I model the Minnesota Commercial's Hiawatha District in the autumn of 2014 on a 26-foot-long shelf layout. The layout has two industries, ADM's Nokomis and Atkinson flour mills. The Atkinson mill is the larger of the two mills and is the last operating flour mill in Minneapolis, which was once home to more than 2 dozen. Atkinson receives inbound wheat cars with outbound loads of flour and animal feed. The prototype has 15 spots for loading and unloading cars and a further 7 spots for a wash track and a storage track. My scaled down version, which is roughly 7 feet long, has 11 loaded spots and 6 storage spots and offers plenty of switching opportunity for operators. Depending on the session, completing the required moves can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And all the outbound spots are car specific, as the mill would often request for certain car numbers, which could be buried in storage tracks anywhere along the district. Love the podcast, Ray, and everything you're building around this community. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. And great answer there. And he hits that point and kind of into operations. When you can put somebody at one industry and leave them there for 45 to an hour and a half.
Yeah, right.
And right. It's perfect. Like, right. You don't have that person walking through the aisleways. They're not bumping into people. They are completely consumed and, held captive by that one industry, which is awesome. That's a great, I love doing that, being able to go to one industry and just stay there for a while and be able to do all that type of switching. So great job, Michael, there. All right, let's take a listen to Todd Armstrong.
Hi, Ray. Hi, guys. It's Todd Armstrong from Canada. I'm working on a layout now that is a shelf layout, a switching layout with an interchange at the one end. And on the one end, I have an intermodal yard as my main industry. And I've got that bench work done, and I have the base plate of the Walthers / Helgen container crane attached to the bench work, and the tracks are in it. So that part is getting close to being done. Not seen it yet, but done. I just have to do a little bit more wiring and a little bit of scenery, and I'm continuing on around the rest of the layout now. But that's the main industry, is my intermodal terminal. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Boy, I start to think about Matt Fricks and the stuff that he just kind of summarized for me. Another industry where more than meets the eye. You think it's just containers and container on, container off, but there is a whole lot going on at these intermodal terminals to make all this logistics happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a bigger operation than we all realize.
Yeah, for sure. So this is great. And it's heading towards more of the modern way of product moving by intermodal containers. So very cool. Yep. Thanks for sharing that with us, Todd. And our last one, I initially thought he was in the witness protection program, but then I found out that that's not the case. But let's start to listen to this, and then we'll figure out. So this is what we initially started with.
Hello, everybody. My name is Don Iris, the owner of the Province of Worcester Railroad in Sebastian, Florida. and a co-host of Ops with Don Iris.
So I called Don and I asked him, I said, Don, I said, are you in the witness protection program? Because you're not doing a good job of it, because you're not only telling your name, you're telling us where you're from. And so if you're in the witness protection program, hiding your voice, but it ended up being just an oddly corrupt file. But I hope everybody has a little bit of fun with that. Don in the witness protection program. So let's listen to Don as we know him, accent and all. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Don Iris, the owner of the Providence and Worcester Railroad in Sebastian, Florida, and a co-host of Ops with Don Iris on the podcast. I'd have to say my cornerstone industry would have to be inland paper. It's a nice little switching area. You can keep an operator busy here for about an hour and a half. It takes all different kind of card types, and it's actually the best part of the layout for operations, and everybody seems to want to do this job at the paper mill. So I would have to say inland paper on my layout for sure. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, and there's another industry there, one is, operator there for an hour and a half. But there's more, it's, the product, all the raw material that comes in to make paper, then, outbound shipments of paper product. There's just a whole lot that can happen at a paper industry.
Oh, yeah. Chemicals, equipment. That's another one of those industries when I see someone say, well, I've got a 12 by 15 spare room and I want to, put a layout in it. And they start talking about multiple industries. And my answer is always, man, you got an opportunity right there. I always ask, the first question I ask is, do you want a racetrack because you want to run trains in a circle, or you want to have fun? Because you can go to a train club, you can join a local train club and run your trains in a circle. Mm-hmm. If you want to have hours and hours and hours, I mean, look at him, hour and a half. Yeah. You come home from work and you've got an hour and a half of free time on a Friday night. You can go to your train room with a paper mill, and that paper mill is the layout. Yeah. I've seen those things from Google Earth, and they are most certainly a 10 by 15 room in your house. That's the entire layout is the paper mill, and apparently it's an hour and a half of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And challenge and, different cars, different car types, obviously, and then, different product and just a whole bunch of different things that can make that a really interesting operation. So hopefully the message has gone through for everybody that listen. I appreciate everybody sending in their answers to the question of the month. And it just seems like we have a common theme of, it can be a single industry or just a few industries, but a lot of action at those industries, and you can do it. There's ways to do it. Kevin, you've got your business, tullymodels.com. You've got two sides of it, the Southern Tier grain modeler supply, and then your steel mill modeler supply. A lot of the parts, pieces, components that will help folks get on their way to building the industry of their dreams. And you got a lot of knowledge to help them out along the way. So I encourage folks, if you're looking to build either of the two, head over to tullymodels.com and check out what Kevin's got going on there. Kevin, thank you so much for coming by and sharing all of this with us.
No problem, Ray. I'm always happy to come by and talk about industry, especially heavy industry. It's definitely a passion of mine, and I certainly, as I've said on your show before, it's definitely a pure joy for me to help people kind of achieve what they're looking for on their layout when they might think that they can't.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.